So I'm sorry I haven't put up a video in the last 2, maybe 3 weeks. I'm trying to think when the last one. The last one was my Transformers The Last Night review. And that was while I was on vacation. Yes, I was on vacation, and once I got back home, all I could do was work, catch up on movies, and admittedly Pokemon Go because of the legendaries. Sorry, I do play. Now, because my countdowns for the end of the year take a while because there's a lot of movies I have to see and I like to review movies before I come up with a list, I usually like to do a middle of the year section where I say all the movies that I've liked and disliked, or at least the top ones and the worst ones so far that year. So the first half of the year is January 2017 all the way through June. If the movie had a wide release in the US within that time frame, it is eligible for this countdown. Now, a movie like The Big Sick that had a limited release in June but a wide release in July, that's part of the July for me, and so it's not part of this countdown. Though it would make it on this list if it was a wide release in June. And also bear in mind that I also include some movies that have wide release in January, even though they had limited releases in December of the other year. And even though I've seen probably close to 90 movies this year so far, there's plenty of movies I still missed. And so movies that would be eligible for this countdown that I haven't seen yet and probably could make this list, I'll give a brief list of them. Silence, The Founder, A United Kingdom, The Girl with All the Gifts, My Life as a Zucchini, Raw, Colossal, The Void, The Red Turtle, Land of Mine, The Transfiguration, War Machine, The Survivalist, Berlin Syndrome, My Cousin Rachel, Oakjaw. There's probably more that I can mention, but if I mentioned all the ones that probably could make this list, it would probably take up the whole video. Now, even though I'm doing a big list of my top 20 films so far this year that I've enjoyed, I still have a few honorable mentions because for me it's really hard to just mention a few because sometimes I personally like movies that just don't make the list. Or there are a few movies that really surprised me. So let's do a few honorable mentions. Cars 3, the Lego Batman movie, Ghost in the Shell, The Belko Experiment, surprisingly Captain Underpants, Wonder Woman didn't make this list, honorable mention, Hidden Figures, and The Promise. These didn't quite make the top 20, but they are ones that I do really admire, and some that really surprised me. Like, I can't even believe that I have Cars 3 as an honorable mention, even for the first half of the year. Okay, let's actually get into my top 20 of the year so far. And keep in mind, this list may vary, it may change. Some of these movies I'm going to see again, especially if I have to review them, especially if I have to make an updated countdown of a specific month. So the scores can change, the placings in this countdown could drastically change, but for now, this is what they are. My number 20 is a documentary, and it's called They Call Us Monsters. Now, there isn't a lot that I want to talk about with this documentary too much because I'd like you to experience it for yourself, especially if it is available for you on Netflix. It was for me, and it was pretty powerful. Essentially, it is about 3 young youths in prison, young adults, teenagers. They've all committed very serious crimes, and it's all about the law of whether they should be treated as adults, whether they should be pardoned, if they should be more lenient on the crimes because of them being young adults, so on and so forth. And you get to meet 3 of these real people, real young adults in jail for terrible crimes, and you see them on their journey as they're in this creative writing class. The documenter or I'm guessing it was someone responsible for the documentary is also the teacher of this creative writing class in this prison with these kids, and it's pretty amazing. It's just one of those really solid documentaries that was pretty damn effective. Now, for some people, this movie could drag a bit at times, but I think it's a very short movie from what I remember. I think it was only about an hour and 20 minutes, give or take. Now, there are a few movies in my list that will be controversial because a few people had very mixed feelings for some of these movies. Let's face it, no one's ever going to love the same movie. No one's ever going to hate the same movie. There's different opinions on movies all around the world. And my number 19 might be a little more controversial. Some people really hated this movie. I enjoyed it for what it's worth. It is King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword. Now, I am a fan of King Arthur type stories, and I do recognize that it is very different from most of the King Arthur stories, but at the same time, I wasn't really expecting it to be exactly like your typical King Arthur story. First of all, it's directed by Guy Ritchie, and if you know a lot of his films, if you've seen a lot of his films, King Arthur is pretty similar to the rest of his films. With a bunch of snappy dialogue and a little bit more modernized feel to the characters, of classic characters, similar to how Sherlock Holmes was done. And so I wasn't expecting the conventional King Arthur story. I was expecting Guy Ritchie's twist on it, and that's what I got. As long as the same themes were in this movie that I expect from a classic Arthur tale of a young boy, in this case a young man, who has a little bit more of a commoner's life. Not really wanting to be king, not really wanting to rule anything, but has the gift, has the talent, and is destined to. And in that same sense, it is a little bit more conventional fantasy when it's an evil uncle that has taken over the kingdom and, well, King Arthur, or Arthur, has to overthrow that king, that evil king. Now, one of the things that I can understand people hating about King Arthur is the back and forth and how there's 3, sometimes even 4 scenes jumbled together in a hectic way that goes back and forth between all of those scenes as a scene is going. It's hard to explain without actually showing you, but honestly, I never felt lost in this movie, and even though it does it a little too often for many people's taste, I liked the unique style. I thought that even though it might be style over substance, I enjoyed it and never got lost, and some of these scenes worked best that way. Like, I understand the reason for doing this, and it does make it more unique. Unfortunately, to some people, it makes it more hectic and baffling, and people will hate it. People, I'm sure, hate it. Now, my number 18 was a movie that I was kind of surprised by, and hopefully I'd go back to my movie experiences because I had a unique, interesting movie experience for this film. My number 18 is Megan Levy. Now, when I saw the trailer, I knew, okay, this trailer's probably giving me too much. There's a cheesiness to the trailer, but at the same time I was intrigued by it and I did want to see the film. Sure enough, it did come to our theater. I saw it, and thanks to that, and thanks to the technical difficulties that happened in the theater for my experience, I got a free ticket, which I can use on a bad movie that I don't have to spend money on. Guess what I'm going to use that free ticket for? It's the reason I am saving off my worst of countdown for July. It's because I haven't seen the Emoji Movie yet. Thank you, Megan Levy, for giving me that free ticket, so I don't have to spend money on the Emoji Movie. But anyway, I thought Megan Levy was a well-acted film. I thought it was really emotionally powerful at times, and it was a really good war drama, even though there isn't a lot of action in the film. I think there's only one true action sequence, and even so, it's not like this over-the-top action sequence. It's more strategic. It's quicker, and it's more of a tactical type of action. And honestly, Megan Levy is what I wish Max was, which is a soldier bonding with their dog and also searching for mines and weapons, and these two teaching each other how to live, how to love, how to connect. Honestly, Megan Levy, played by Kate Mara, and the dog, Rex, both go through their emotional character arcs in this film. I thought the movie was wonderful, it was dramatic, it had its moments of cheese, but when it needs to be subtle, it does it subtly and with class. And the acting was great overall. A lot of the side characters, a lot of the other actors in this movie did a fine job as well. I'm not sure if this is going to be one of those movies that gets nominated for Oscar buzz, but it has potential. Okay, my number 17 is yet another controversial movie that you either loved it or you hate it for the most part. My number 17 is Alien Covenant. Okay, first off, I am a big Aliens fan. I did like Prometheus as well, and I understood how it could be a prequel to Alien. To be honest, I didn't need Alien Covenant to really understand that Prometheus is a prequel. It's not as good as a lot of the Alien movies, still better than Alien Resurrection, I would say. And do bear in mind, I do not hate any of the Alien movies, except maybe Alien vs. Predator Requiem, if I include that in the list. That's probably the only one that I dislike. Like most people, Alien and Aliens are my favorite two of the Alien franchise, but I do have a soft spot for both Prometheus and Alien 3, and now Alien Covenant. Now I do understand there is an unnecessariness of this movie, and that it sort of forced Prometheus and Alien to combine in a movie a little too fast. Almost like, hey, Prometheus didn't have enough aliens, people were pissed off, so let's put more aliens in it, even though it's not ready for that in this story, in this universe building of how the aliens came to be. And again, that of itself is some people's hate of the movie, and we don't need to know a backstory for aliens, for the xenomorphs. Which, yeah, arguably, it is true. But as long as you do a good story with it, I'm fine. There is something smart about this movie deep within it that I enjoyed. That's the Prometheus part of this movie. But at that same time, it's not enough to really call it a really great sci-fi movie. But it is a decent horror film. It is a decent thriller that I did enjoy. Wish I liked the characters a little bit more, but the only real characters you really care about or get enough character arc for is Michael Fassbender's character, or Michael Fassbender's characters. Sure, Danny McBride was good in the film, and Catherine Waterston did a good job as the female lead of the movie. Really, it was Michael Fassbender's movie all along. I would believe most people would say my number 16 doesn't belong on this list because it's a 2016 movie, but I had a wide release in January, so I'm considering it a 2017 movie. My number 16 is Patriots Day. And while I surprisingly didn't get to review this is one of those January movies that I didn't have the time for and wasn't able to review, but I highly enjoyed it. It was a really superb thriller. Now, superb might not be the best way to describe this movie, but it is definitely a really effective thriller that had me on the edge of my seat for the most part. Now, I knew of the Boston bombings. I remember where I was when it happened. I was working at the fitness center, and I remember it was all over the news. I was going into the locker room to deal with my job, to get the new towels and clean up and make sure everything was fine. And it was on the news, it was on the TV in there, and that's when I knew about it, but I don't remember too much about it or the manhunt for the people responsible. So this was a pretty refreshing movie for me because I didn't know too much going into it. I just knew that there were bombings. And so it was interesting to see, and while there definitely is things changed and there is a whole character that isn't really based off a real person, Mark Wahlberg, I could see that he is a combination of several people, most likely, and is also our sort of main protagonist because he's a person that's in all these different events. so we can attach ourselves to one main person, because a lot of people don't like ensemble pieces, and this probably would have been best, and pretty much is still, an ensemble piece. It's a bunch of different characters and a bunch of different people with different situations that connect and bring about this whole big story. Everyone is a piece to this puzzle, to this mystery, to this thriller, and Peter Berg did a really effective thriller. Now, I probably still like Deepwater Horizon as well as Lone Survivor a little bit more than Patriots Day, because Lone Survivor is an extremely effective action movie, Deepwater Horizon is a really great disaster movie, and this one is not as action-packed, not as deeply emotional as either of those two, but at the same time it's an effective thriller, it's an interesting story, and I think everyone did a really good job. And the whole bombing portion to the movie was extremely effective, and each time I see it, it still makes me cringe because of like how this really happened, and it still feels real to me, probably because of the camera, how it's all handheld and everything, and how it jumps back and forth between videos, not real videos I would imagine, but they look like videos that could have been captured on that day. There's still a few pitfalls with this movie, especially with it being more of an ensemble piece. There isn't a lot of character we get with each of these characters, and the victims in this movie are pretty shoved aside to the end. Like, there's the whole massacre that happens, the bombing that happens, and you really get into these characters, you really care for them, and you see how destroyed their lives could be with these lost limbs and bleeding everywhere, and then them getting separated in hospitals. But then that's all sort of shoved aside because it all focuses on the manhunt, it focuses on the thriller aspect, the mystery aspect, the action-packed aspect, and then we go back to the victims after the manhunt is done. I wish there could have been a little bit more of the people in the hospital, if they could have done that, just so that it doesn't feel like they're forgotten and then put back in at the very end. Okay, my number 15 is a January film. It's M. Night Shyamalan. It is Split. Now, this is another January movie that I didn't get to review, and it probably should be a longer review. I'll hold off to speaking too much about this, but I did really enjoy it. Every time I see it, it really wavers on how much I like it. Some days I'll watch it and I won't like it as much. Other days, I love it more. It's really strange, and out of all the movies that I've seen this year, this one fluctuates the most, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it has something to do with the dialogue. The dialogue isn't the greatest, but I do love the acting, especially from our main characters. Anya Taylor-Joy was really great in this movie. You might remember her from The Witch, or The Witch, if you want to pronounce it with the two V's. But no, she was really great in this movie, and all the movies that I've seen her in, that's only 3 so far, The Witch, Morgan, and this, she's been one of the standouts in each of those movies. Actually, the standout in each of those movies. But of course, probably the best performance and the craziest performance is James McAvoy. But of course, he would be the talk of this movie. He's the one with the split personalities. He's the one with all the different characters that he has to play. And he really does feel like he physically changes for some of these people, even though it's the same actor. I did like how the story progressed. I did like how you get more and more detail as the movie goes along. And it's not necessarily a twist, because you do see it coming, it does build upon it, and you're like, oh, so this is like this. The actually main twist of the movie, the thing that is probably the most surprising, is the fact that it's a shared universe with another M. Night Shyamalan movie. And that's when it's like, oh, so this is even more than what I saw. And oh, okay, that's very interesting. But it's not that twist, and it's not that shared universe that makes me love this movie. I still feel it's a well-crafted film. There's definitely things in it that I don't like as much, and it's not one of my favorite M. Night Shyamalan movies. I probably even like The Visit a little bit more, but I really enjoyed Split, and it was a pleasant surprise. It definitely helps solidify M. Night Shyamalan's new approach to movies, where it is a more fun horror film, one that's a little bit mixed with comedy and horror and thriller aspects, and a little bit more independent-like and a little cheaper, not like big budget blockbuster movies that he's done in the past or tried to do. Man, I'm definitely interested in whatever his next movie will be. Honestly, there's a lot of horror movies on this list because there was a lot of really damn good horror movies this year. Last year there was a lot of great ones, and I think this year is no exception. My number 14 is A Cure for Wellness, and this is another movie that's a little more controversial, a little bit more split. There is a very weird style to it, and I have a feeling that this could be a cult classic. Because oftentimes when it's a horror movie or any other genre piece, something a little unconventional and just strange and weird and bizarre can sometimes be hated at first and then years later become a cult classic and people start loving it more. Hopefully this movie will go down that same way because I absolutely loved this film when I saw it. Didn't get to review it because it was a few I think every month has a few movies that I didn't review, and this was a pleasant surprise. It was weird, and so far the only movie to truly creep me out when it comes to the horror franchise, because horror, I've been so used to horror nowadays, I've seen so many horror films that I've desensitized to the horror elements. I'm desensitized to horror in movies, and so it takes a lot to really even creep me out. And the disturbing imagery, the crazy things that happen in A Cure for Wellness is disturbing. I was never confused with this movie as well. I enjoyed how the movie went along. I understood everything, but I can see how some people might get confused. I thought the performances were great. I thought everything was really immaculately shot and presented, and I really enjoyed this movie. Okay, my number 13 is the live-action Disney film that we got, or remake. It is The Beauty and the Beast. Now, it is a little tough to talk about the Beauty and the Beast live-action version because it is a remake to a classic, and there are certain things that the classic does better that the new one doesn't, and there are a few things that the new one does better that the classic doesn't. And so there is a balancing act in this movie where I don't know where it would lie if I love the classic more or this new one. I probably like them roughly the same because of how there are things that are better in one and there are things that are better in the other. This is more of a musical than the original was, and I'm not a big fan of musicals, but I highly enjoyed this film, and the music just never bothered me. There's often times when in a musical that I just get a little bored with musicals because it's just singing and singing and singing, and I'm not all that engaged, but this one I was. Maybe it's because I saw the classic first, and I just have fond memories of it. The voice acting, and I thought a lot of the characters and a lot of the actors and actresses fit the roles perfectly, especially Luke Evans as Gaston and Dan Stevens as the Beast. His voice killed it in this movie. A lot of the voice acting was good though. There were completely new songs in this movie, and a lot of them felt a little unnecessary or weren't as good as the classic songs from the animated film. But there was one song in particular, one tragic song by the Beast, by Dan Stevens, that was just as good, if not better, than some of the classic songs from the animated film. And if you can do that in a film, by God, that is one amazing feat. There were still a few things that I didn't like too much in this film. I thought the visual effects were off and on. Sometimes it was really great, sometimes it was just okay or average. And Josh Gad's LeFou as becoming more of a redeemable villain, I didn't like that as much. My number 12 is another horror movie of February, something that has a little bit more commentary, definitely smarter, and really damn entertaining, and sometimes funny. It is Get Out. And I haven't seen this one twice yet. I've only seen this one once. Like I said, some of these movies can go up and down a little bit more on this list. I have a feeling Get Out will go a little higher on my list once I see it, and once I give a more in-depth rating and review. I liked all the acting, and it did feel like almost M. Night Shyamalan's new style, with a blend of comedy and horror, and just some really weird and trippy stuff. This movie did have messages, it did have commentary, and people can go into this movie and come out of it with totally different beliefs on what this movie's about. It was directed superbly, it was acted really damn great, characters were interesting, it was fun, it was creepy, it was scary, it was weird. It was everything I like in a movie, especially a horror comedy. Okay, my number 11 is a British film that was released last year in most countries, I believe. But the US, we got it on June. Can't remember when in June, but we got it in June. And it is I, Daniel Blake. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this film because it is a drama. It is funny at times, but it is emotionally raw. One of the things I love about this film is even when it's the dramatic moments, even when it's the moments where it's supposed to be emotional and raw and just gut-wrenching, they don't do the typical thing where there's a score during this moment, a score that tries to tell you how you should feel for this. There's no score in this movie. It's just filmed with drama and acting, and you really feel it, or at least I definitely felt it, every time these emotional moments happen in the film. This is emotional, it's minimalistic, it's subtle, it's really damn great, really well acted. There's a few things here and there that are unnecessary, but at the same time, just watch it for yourself.